Blackman of the Nile and his family, Part 11. The above triangular field contains mathematical calculations that solve the area of the tri-leg or house of Amenta, pyramid or house of heaven, the netherworld. It was developed in the pre-dynastic era, but the problem was solved in the 4th century BCE, which was during the ending of the 30th dynasty. 341 BCE, the indigenous Africans of the Nile Valley who came from points farther south along the Great Lakes region of central Alkebulan not only solved the triangle or pyramid field in such an early stage in man's beginning into the reaches of scientific intellect before the origin of Western civilization, Greek society, they also squared the circle by using an equation of the geometrical equivalent of the 8th, 9th, or the length of the diameter and reached the constant number 3 and 16. It is almost the exact number and figure adopted by the Greeks for 206, the 16th letter of their alphabet, which corresponds to further modification by the English alphabet P or P. It is a symbol which designates the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter, or 3.14 pi. The Nile Valley Africans also saw the area of all of the objects they used in the buildings and development of their earliest high cultures civilizations. Their geometricians and trigonometricians had also begun to challenge much more complex mathematical and scientific problems. They all started, nevertheless, from the most basic mathematical formula of the Mason field numerology of the Osirica mystery system, as shown in the following examples. Although the Nile Valley's Africans had many set symbols for certain mixed numbers, most were written with a numerator of 1 over a denominator. The above calculations, as thousands more that the Africans developed, represented a very early stage of development of their mathematical awareness of the function of numbers and their equivalent meaning and application to material usage and the spiritual thought process. All of this they accomplished before the dawn of Western civilization. In order to multiply, they employed the same whole numbers process used in the addition we used above, except they also had a duplication series. They did this by doubling the multiplication as many times as were necessary. For example, to multiply the whole numbers 15 times 6, they did the following. By adding the left column and then the corresponding numbers of the right column, they arrived at the answer. They both added together and they got. The main reason for such the complexities in the above method of calculation was the fact that the Nile Valley and Great Lakes Africans had not yet developed a figure beyond the number 8. At this early period in their history, one must remember that we are dealing with a period that extended far into the past before the first of the so-called Semites from Asia, the Hyksos, arrived in Alkebulan, Africa, to marry Egypt to be exact, which was at the end of the 14th dynasty, 1675 BCE. The period we are dealing with was hundreds of years before the first literate Greek of historical records recorded his first word in his first book, Homer and the Iliad. Is it not strange that we are not taught any of the above facts in courses related to the history of mathematics in institutions specializing in white studies, such as public and private schools? Throughout the United States of America, Europe, Great Britain, and all of these colonies controlled by European and European American powers that be. Why is this so? Because these facts could not be told, and those who are in control of racial purity and the protection of the chosen people still retain the myth about Moses, Pythagoras, Aristotle, Plato, and Euclid, only to mention a few of the so-called great thinkers of the Western world, being the progenitors of the Osiris mysteries. All of them, when they were learning, were students in Ta-Meri and Ta-Nehisi, under thick lips, broad nose, woolly hair, and burnt skin. Ethiopians, the ancient name for what is called today Negroes and Bantus. For an adequate extension of information beyond this point, with respect to the direct calculations of higher mathematics developed from this level by the indigenous Africans of the Nile Valley and Great Lakes high cultures, the following work should be consulted. G.G.M. James, Stolen Legacy, 1945. W. Armistead's A Tribute to the Negro, London, 1845. J.J. Jackson's Introduction to African Civilization, New York, 1971. Yosef Ben-Jocchannan's Africa, Mother of Western Civilization, New York, 1971. B.L. Latrix, The Africans Before the Foreigners in Egypt, London, 1798. Count C.F. Volney's Ruins of Empire, Paris, 1800. Sir E.A. Wallace Bulge, Book of the Dead, and Papyrus of Ani, London, 1895. All of these works will also provide the general reader, researcher, and student with added references to more extensive and detailed data dealing with the numerology and Masonified mathematics of the great teachings of the mystery system. Masonic chronological calculations of the Grand Lodge of Luxor. Working from a formula based upon talismanic numerology, we have the following: the numerical value of cubic doctales of the talismanic number G, the talismanic number D, and the square root of the sum of the squares of the length and the eighth of the arc is equal to the mathematical calculation. By substituting numbers for days, we arrive at the length of one sidereal or south year, which is equal to, in the above formula, the following values were used: days, hours, minutes, and seconds. The complexity of the development of this formula required many pages of detailed information for a minute simplification in order that the average reader could fully comprehend in truest value. The question that would be necessary follow such a disclosure is, why is it mentioned here? Because the author would like the general reader, as the average student of African history and high culture, to see the extent to which the early indigenous Africans of the Great Lakes and Nile Valleys mathematical science numerology as a science and the religious purpose is served in terms of philosophical dimensions, all of which can be observed in the works that came out of the Osiris that was centered in the Grand Lodge of Luxor. The ark mentioned in the above formula is exactly the same as the stone chest, which is detailed in the Book of the Coming Forth by Day, which the ancient Hebrew Jews learnt in Ta-Meri and Ta-Nehisi, then co-opted and plagiarized in their own version they call the Ark of the Covenant. This they have presented in the so-called 5 books of Moses. We will uncover this type of dramatic information in many of the older books on this subject area, especially when we deal with the readings like the following in the Holy Torah's 2nd book of Moses, otherwise known as the book of Exodus. The Ark of the Covenant, built and set up by Moses in the wilderness according to the sacred volume, and which has not been seen, is precisely similar in all the measurements to the stone chest still to be seen in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramids, and which is undoubtedly the original, although the contents are gone. According to the ritual, it should have contained the coffined one, and we know that the miniatures of this used to be carried around the Egyptian temples at Memphis on stated occasions during their religious rites. The standard cubit used by the indigenous Nile Valley Africans was equal to 1.72091 English feet. This is transferred to the Hebrew lunar scale by using the following values of the formula, which equals, and liberating the numerical values of the latent records in the first class, the talismanic number of letter G is applicable. It represents the seventh part of the sum of 7 cubic lunar dectile in the solid generated by the 3 dimensions of the African stone chest. The conversion of this into a whole number, or cubic dactyls of the solar scale, is definitely prescribed. The Masonic or Mystery Systems theorem for reading a mixed number into a definite number is to add unity to the whole number as the fractional part exceeds a half. The formula formed by this indigenous Africa theorem is as follows. In order to relate the ancient Asian and African ancient Israelite chief kings' chronology to their Nile Valley African cousins of Timeri and Ta-Nehisi, Ethiopia, Punt, and Lebanon, and the Central Great Lakes regions included, we must first establish a common period of reign, at least one monarch or histo-religious figure on each side of this extended family's geological tree. Thus we have the above chronology was calculated by Hakinkanyan Bey with a series of special numerological numbers and Masonified formula he adopted from the high priest Manetho's calculations of the Nile Valley indigenous African pharaohs' geophysical calendar and chronology of their dynastic reign from the 1st through the 30th dynasty, 3200 through 322 BCE. Note that the last of the African pharaohs did not rule beyond Timeri's military occupation by the Persians. In examining the above Manethonian list, one can certainly question the difference between a tropical year and a Menopherian era. Because of this, the author of this value has shown the method of calculating both below. It is also noted that Manetho could not have developed a chronological chart for Adam, since the ancient Africans of the Nile Valley and Great Lakes regions did not have such a character in any aspect of their mythology or religion, much less their history and high culture. For this reason, and many more we have observed so far, the above lists are misleading. At this juncture, in our safari into the inner circles of the Nile Valley and Great Africa's intellect, it is necessary to reflect on the major point of concern, that is, the treatment of the ancient African Heribu, Jews of Timeri and Ta-Nehisi, as a separate race than their former slave masters, the indigenous Africans' worships of Ra, as taught by most European and European American educators bearing the name white people, which of course includes Semites, but there are countless number of black, brown, yellow, and red-skinned Heribu or Israelites, Hebrews or Jews, available to be seen in the present state of Israel today. The fact that the non-whites among the Jews in Israel are suppressed and dehumanized by their fellow white Jews, also called Semites, from the United States of America, Great Britain, and Western Europe. Those who, in fact, control Israel, does not in any way, shape, or fashion negate their right to claim ancestry with the original Jew, Abraham. Thus, the alleged Jewishness, which one is supposed to inherit from a Jewish mother, is a racist and religiously bigoted myth without the least bit of biblical truth, especially if we are to notice that the Jewish woman, as the Jewish nation, has been raped by every conquering army that occupied ancient Palestine and Israel down through the centuries. Did the Jewish woman, black, white, brown, yellow, or red, or whatever else there may be, not suffer the same fate during her enslavement to the Africans of Timeri and Ta-Nehisi? Or are we to assume that the Jewish slavery was different to Negro slavery? Using Alexander II, the great invasion of Timeri in 332 BCE, as a point of reference, we find that the ruler of Israel of 29 Nile years later was King Simon I. He reigned over Israel from 303 BCE, following the death of his father, King Eleazar, who died in the 23rd year of the pontificate. Simon I was succeeded by King Onias I in 324 BCE. This would place King Onias assuming the throne of Israel at approximately 8 years after the invasion of Tyre by Alexander II, and a little less than 3 years following Alexander's death. We could have used this astronomical canon of Ptolemy's and Polysium's of the ecclesiastical account in relating the above dates. His interpretation of them was the first established for the Nile year calendar dating process, with relationship to the dynastic chronology of the high culture that preceded the Macedonian Greece invasions and conquest of Tyre and parts of Lower Ta-Nehisi in 332 BCE. All of this preceded the occupation which brought about European imperial colonialism, the so-called 31st dynasty for the first time in North Africa. Moreover, the ecclesiastical year calendar contained 2 more pharaoh kings of the Nile Valley high cultures than the others mentioned so far. These 2 pharaohs allegedly reigned between the rule of Pharaoh Artaxerxes and Pharaoh Darius Nothus, son of the sun. At this juncture, in our historical safari into the heritage of the Africans, African Americans, African Caribbeans, we must take specific notation of the exact calculation for Alexander II and Alexander II conquest of Tyre. Thus we shall find that the actual Nile year amounted to a period that was the total 331-628 BCE, which was rounded off to the whole number, 332 BCE. This period in the dynastic sequence of Tyre's chronological chart was called the Persian era, or epic, by the high priest Manetho. It began with Cyrus Hushaps, son of the sun, in the Nile year 535.750, or the equal of 525 BCE. To make certain that the calculations of the Nile years were kept in total accuracy, Manetho, who had established checkpoints for references where there were no factional parts of the Nile year, noted that the following phenomena: during the 50th Nile year of the reign of Cecrops, 1596 through 1546, who reigned 26 Nile years in Athens, 1596 through 1570, and 24 Nile years in Tyre, 1570 through 1546. There was a calculation that resulted in a fractional part of a Nile year. The last reference to the calculations we have been so far engaged in can be best observed in the records of the Armenian era of Hakf, which during that period of time when the Nile year calculations ran in fractional parts. But this method of calculation Nile years was comprised of the conglomerate of 4 separate schemes. First, the era beginning with the tropical cycle, a year very much longer than that of the Sothis calendar system used before the alleged exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. Third, the era of Menopherian, and fourth, the era of proclamation of the birth of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. The actual date given by Masonified calculations for the Haggai dynasty of Armenia was 2492.55 tropical years, and for the Arsacide dynasty of Armenia, 577.50 tropical years. Both figures or dates calculated gave the period of time-space elapsed from the beginning of the tropical cycle up to the alleged birth of the Christ child, or nativity, adopted by renegade Hebrew chronicler Luke, also known as the evangelist. The calculation used to obtain said result was as follows. The difference between lunar years and Nile years was arrived by taking away 340 years from 1340 lunar years, which equals the equivalent in Nile years. Using said figures, we can establish the actual date of Joseph's sale to Potiphar, captain of the guard of Egypt, if such did in fact occur other than the Hebrew religious story in the Torah and the 5 books of Moses, which is set at 430 lunar years before the alleged Exodus, or 1298 through 1232 BCE. The following dates are only a few of the most important historical periods in the term of Nile years. We are still using the ancient indigenous Africans Nile year calendar on page 130 of this volume instead of the Julian or Gregorian calendar. This is equally true for the African solar calendar and stellar calendar, the latter having been developed sometime during 10,000 BCE, which was approximately 6,800 years before the first dynasty, 3200 BCE. In the above calculations under the heading of solar year calendar, the figures 7.00, 6.9, and 2.10 indicate the time space elapsed between periods. The lunar calendar related periods are supposed to have taken place between the Africans of Egypt and the Hebrew or Asians of the area around ancient Palestine, or today Israel's desert. We can now move into another area of much more complexity, sophisticated, Masonified numerological calculations related to the house of the netherworld, erection of stelae, development of astrological and astronomical observations, all of which the indigenous Africans of the Nile Valley and Great Lakes region developed in order to deal with the sciences related to the rise and fall of the tide and flow of the Nile River, and the data related to the development of astrology, magic, religion, philosophy, and other disciplines of the 7 liberal arts. The formula for time years gives us the basic calculation for the equal length trileg of the pole stars or house of fire, meaning the pyramids or house of Amenta. Thus we have the pyramid ideogram and the sacred magical number 7. We also have the Masonified numbers B equals 24 and C equals 15. Using the time year formula, we have times, and a half. These dates relates back to the second of the 4 Persian kings mentioned by the Hebrew prophet Daniel in the Torah. The kings referred to began with Cambyses. The dates were between 1360 and 1365 lunar years from the Menopherian era, sometimes around 525 BCE. This calculation was identical with the formula used by Dionysius in his Masonified numerological calculation of the area of the birth of Jesus Christ. Using the same D above, but in this negative sense, we have the following, which is during the reign of Pharaoh Darius, the 3rd Persian king that ruled in Egypt. It is also equal to the date when the building of the Israelites' second temple by Zerubbabel and Joshua was completed, 527 BCE. These dates were computed in accordance with the Masonic era of the birth of Jesus Christ as proclaimed by Hebrew Jews, many of whom became the originators of Christianity and the established church of Christendom in North Africa, the first of which took place while they were still living in Nubia, Ur Zeti, and Ethiopia, Moro, and Kush. There are certain other scattered data we can use here. However, we notice, or should have, that from the beginning of the Sotis period, there were certain established patriarchal chronologies in the era of the Exodus, which was also the end of the Israelites' 97th generation. Yet only 2 men listed were actually in existence by the era of the Exodus. They were Caleb and Joshua. In this chronology, Moses was allegedly 80 years old. Joshua was 48, and Caleb was 38. All calculated on the principles of lunar years and the era of the Exodus. It is also indicated that the Herero supposedly left northeast Africa around the Sinai desert of Tamari, to be exact, during the 20th day of the second month of the first year of the Exodus, arriving in Kibroth Hattava after a journey of 3 days, where they remained for 40 days. It must be noticed that the date of the alleged Exodus was Masonified by Theophilus and Flavius Josephus in the variations they developed and introduced to the anti-Menopharian section of the African European high priest Manetho, second Diaspolitan dynasty. The original African historical numerology was, nevertheless, sacrificed by Theophilus and Josephus in order to adopt certain numbers of their own calculations and many chronological schemes for recording dates of the events before the Medius Arborum. Flavian, also known as Flavianus, who we depend upon for the duplication of much of Manetho's original records that were otherwise destroyed by the invading Arab Muslim armies during their jihads as they swept across North and Northeast Africa around 640 CE or AH, added one more name to his anti-Menopharian section of Manetho's second Diaspolitan dynasty than did Josephus and Theophilus. On pages 30 of this chapter, the two Masonic schemes of Hakayan Bey's treatise, Egyptian Chronology, London 1863, pages 66 through 68, should aid us to further understand the previous and following data. From them, we should be able to perceive certain pointers and cross-reference with respect to many of their chronologies in this volume, particularly in this chapter. Hopefully, they also serve and show that the indigenous Africans, the so-called Negroes or Bantus of Tamari, did not originate from any kind of Caucasian, Indo-European, Aryan, or Semitic and Hamitic ancestry in the mythical drama of the Holy Torah story about Noah's son and the matter of a curse that God placed on him in one of his fits of anger. The following chronologies will also show that the formulas for the mathematical calculations from the numerological system of the Osirica were first used in the planning of domestic buildings, pyramids, obelisks, stelae, layouts, and surveys for engineering projects of canals and dams that were used for irrigation schemes dealing with the rise and fall of the Nile River. They will also show that from these Masonified mathematical formulas and numerological sophistication developed by these ancestors of the Africans of the Harlems of the entire world, the United States of America and Western Europe in particular, all other mathematical systems known to modern man derive their origin. The above developments preceded the Europeans in Tamari by thousands of years, but such were equally true of the contributions made by the African European high priest Manetho of the mystery systems. While he was under duress of the army of the Macedonian general Sotar, who seized the reign of the Egyptian government at the death of his king and military commander, Alexander II, thereafter taking upon himself the name Sotar first, which he later changed to Ptolemy I, all of which he accomplished with the aid of Aristotle, who had already begun to sack all of the royal libraries and other repositories of their movable documents and artifacts he could find, much of which he published as his own works and placed his name upon them as authors. Such was the conduct of men who started what was to become the 32nd dynasty of Egypt, the 31st being that of Alexander II, 332 BCE. This too was the first time in the history of Tamari of that period that finally developed into one of infamy.